Well, we have a very unusual start of the academic year, as I don't think I need to remember this, but we're here to celebrate two things, actually: the official academic opening for our master's students and the annual gathering. We call it Trobada. It's probably the only Catalan word we have in our vocabulary, which is gathering for all professors. This is the first time we organize these two events together. So online events have many drawbacks, like the lack of this warm physical presence, but a few positive highlights that we're eager to take as an opportunity, and this is one. So for the first time, we do two events that gather a lot of people together, and we really hope that next year we can see each other present with presential closeness. Students and professors have already the opportunity up to now to meet and share knowledge in the month and a half that has passed since we started the brush ups for students and then the master programs. We now have another opportunity to learn from each other. We have organized a roundtable where we can all learn and interact. So thanks for attending this roundtable today. I'm gonna share the screen for a second. And I just have two slides, then I'll pass the floor to Jan. The first one is a picture of last year opening academic gathering where we had Massimo Mora giving the lecture, the opening talk. And we were at the Bella Terra campus in a very nice site. It was a beautiful day. You can see we were in t-shirts and enjoying a very nice afternoon. And we probably were already, we had already a little bit of cava, so we were our faces were happy and close to each other. Well, this is for now not possible. It will be soon, we hope. So in the meantime, this is the program we have for today. I want to thank Jan Eickhout, especially because he has taken the work of organizing this session. And I want to thank all the participants, but I'm gonna leave Jan the time for introducing the panelists. So Jan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Welcome to this double celebration, the Trovada and the opening of the academic year. We're going to do it with a roundtable on COVID, and what a day to do it, because, you know, in less than 7 hours, we're going to be in another lockdown. You know, back to 24/7 cooking meals, no socializing in public places. We're used to it, and a lot has changed. No one would have thought it in February. But in 6 months, a lot has changed. You know, doctors know better how to minimize fatalities, but also economists know a lot more. It's been remarkable how much economists have kind of taken the helm in entering into this debate on topics that, frankly, many of the economists didn't know anything about, including, you know, how diseases spread and using models to do that. We've witnessed some of the polarization in the debate, I think, in the public debate, with less than scientific argument. The US is the case, but also in Spain, you know, the standoff between the local government in Madrid and the central government. It seems for now in Catalonia, the debate is fairly scientific. But I think there's only one way to go, which is to use facts and science-based arguments. And in this new situation, you know, I think the economics profession has taken a step forward, and in particular, the GSE community has too. So the idea today is to, you know, use people who've dedicated the last months to thinking about the COVID-19 crisis. Obviously, we focus on the economic aspects of it, but we also will talk a little bit about measures like social distancing. And just to kind of set the stage here, the idea is that we have a debate. I want you to participate as much as you can. So please, you know, I'm going to follow the chat room. We're also going to open up after the presentation of our participants so you will be able to talk. So please come in with questions, ideas, comments on what you hear. So we'll see for probably about 25 minutes our panelists speak, then we will have time for questions and interventions. So please send your questions already now, we will grab them, but also later on you can ask them live. So without further ado, let me introduce the four panelists. We have Luca Fornaro from CRE, UPF and GSE. He's going to talk about the macroeconomy. Then we'll have Beatriz Gonzalez from the Bank of Spain, who's going to talk about employment and firms, followed by Libertad Gonzalez, who's from UPF and GSE, who's going to talk about gender inequality. And finally, we have Francisco Viols from Autónoma and GSE, who's going to talk about social distancing. I should say each of them has done work on these topics. The debate is going to be fairly broad, and you will hear from them what they have to say. So let me start with Luca. Luca is going to talk about the macroeconomic impacts. Can I ask you, Luca, is there, given the unprecedented kind of stimulus packages that we've never seen before, has this been right? Is this now proof that, for example, helicopter money works? Have we learned something on that, Luca?
Well, so thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this debate. About that, I would say that what this crisis is telling us is that monetary policy is not enough to fight a big recession like this one, especially because a key feature of the current recession is that it's highly concentrated in some sector of the economy. The sector in which there is a lot of contact, a lot of social interaction, the high contact sectors. And monetary policy, helicopter money drop might not be the right way to fight, because they're very blunt too. They affect all the sectors of the economy. And I think that fiscal policy might be a better instrument, because we can design fiscal policy to affect those sectors and those workers which have been most affected by the crisis. And I think that that's what we're observing now. Of course, monetary policy has intervened, there's been expansionary monetary policy, but it's really fiscal policy that is taking the center stage now. Think about, for instance, the expansion in unemployment benefits which is done in the US, or the income replacement policy that have been taking place in the EU. So fiscal policy is really taking the lead.
So Luca, do you think that in terms of the macroeconomic impact, are there things that we could have done better that have been done? And I guess there's a big distinction between the US and Europe in that sense.
Well, I mean, that's a very tough question, and I think it's too soon to answer, because we don't know, still the data are coming, so we don't really know whether we could have done things better or not. To me, the big risk, if I can perhaps share my screen for a second, I show you a bit more. So here, I just prepared some thoughts about the policy response. And as I said, I think that fiscal policy has played a key role, especially in replacing the income lost by workers who work in high contact sectors, in sectors such as tourism or restaurants. And this measure, I think they've been very beneficial, because they've helped to mitigate the hardship faced by these workers. Because one very interesting characteristic of this recession is that it has hit disproportionately hard poor workers. So here, some very interesting data. They show you how employment rate is moving in the US between April and July for a different set of workers. Here are top earners, these are rich workers. And you see this guy had very small hit, and they recover more or less the pre-crisis employment. So the big hit has been the bottom wage quartile, the low income workers. And I think the fiscal policy has done a very good job in helping this worker facing the hardship that is connected to losing the job. So in this sense, I think the fiscal policy has played a positive role. And I think the biggest thing that we might do wrong in the future is to withdraw the fiscal stimulus too soon. I think the big risk that we're facing now is that we will withdraw this fiscal support, this very big fiscal support that we're giving to the economy, before the economy is able to stand its ground, because before the economy is able to recover. Why? Well, because these fiscal measures are very costly. So here is a chart from the latest Imf Fiscal Monitor, right, which is showing you the evolution of public debt in many advanced economies. You see the great lockdown. The COVID-19 crisis is associated with a very big jump in public debt by 20 percentage points of GDP in a few quarters. That's a huge fiscal shock. So the risk is that we might expect to face a fiscal crisis in the future, and we might withdraw fiscal stimulus too soon. That said, if I can add one thing, I think that this risk is unwarranted for most countries. Why? Because currently interest rates are very low. So currently there is a big supply of savings that is chasing very few investment opportunities. So now it's the moment for governments to intervene, to spend more, and to profit from this low interest rate. Where the risk of a fiscal crisis might materialize, I think, it's unfortunately in the euro area periphery, countries such as Spain and Italy. Because here, COVID-19 has hit particularly hard. Moreover, since this country belongs to the euro area, there is a lot of financial integration in the euro area. There is a big risk that this country might face capital flights, and this might generate a fiscal crisis. So what can go wrong in the future, in my opinion, is this, that there can be a fiscal crisis at the euro area periphery. And what policy can do wrong here is that in Europe, we've gone in the right direction of putting up a system of fiscal transfer to try to mitigate the asymmetry in the shock across euro area countries. The risk to me is that the system of transfers get put into question in the future.
Luca, if you're happy with that, do you mind if I move on to Beatriz to ask her, like, you know, going a little bit towards more at the firm level? I mean, Luca already referred to basically the type of workers that are hit at the firm level. You know, we see things that are similar that we see in the aggregate. Some people talk about the US in particular, you know, rallying stock markets and at the same time high unemployment, at least slowly recovering, and at the same time also GDP that is not recovering. What do we see in that aspect at the firm level?
So actually, I think one of the characteristics of this shock, as Luca already suggested, is that it is very uneven and it has impacted in very heterogeneous ways different firms. So let me see if I can share the screen for a second so I can show you, for instance, let me just go here. There's been a huge impact on firms' performance. So in this graph, for instance, I'm showing the percentage of firms that are making losses after the COVID shock in red that would not be making losses otherwise. So this means that the baseline is 0. So if there was no shock, this number would be 0. And we see that first, the impact of this shock is huge. So for instance, in tourism, we're talking about more than 95% of firms making losses this year. And also, as I was saying, is very uneven. So it has impacted very differently firms in different sectors. And even though there's been this fiscal support, as Luca was saying, for instance, this is data for Spain, I didn't say. That, for instance, the ERTEs have helped these firms. However, and here we can see these are the blue lines. Even with the ERTEs, most of the firms there are many firms still making losses. So this is really a huge impact, and this is really very uneven. And this is only looking at the cost structure of firms. So I'm not looking at savings or at maybe balance sheet data, which maybe these firms can then somehow be alive for a little bit longer. But still, if these firms need to eat up their savings to face this short-term shock, they might be facing difficulties then in the future in order to finance investment and growth if they cannot access to debt finance or to other sources of finance.
Is the distinction between publicly traded firms and private firms part of that inequality, especially if you look at the stock market? Maybe the US is different from Europe.
No, the problem is that in Spain there are very few publicly traded firms, and these are actually the very large one. And so Spain and the US are very different in terms of this stock market. In the US, there are many more IPOs, there is much more movement on firms going public. Here in Spain, these publicly traded firms are much less. They're very big, but they're very old. They're older than in the US. It is a more static environment, let's say.
Do you have a sense whether the ERTEs, for example, in Spain, these interventions, whether they help more or less the firms or the workers? Because you can think of it as kind of, it's targeted to a worker, but ultimately it also helps the firm. Do you have a sense, is it doing the job for both, or is it kind of lopsided?
Exactly. So I think actually in this case, firms and employment are two sides of the same coin. So it is on one way it is a flexibility, it's a way of giving some flexibility to firms so that they do not need to pay this upfront cost of having to pay the wages at all times. We also know that in Spain, there's this duality in labor markets. So firms can adjust very quickly temporary contracts. And in that sense, this is bad for workers because then the employment of these workers increases much more. But in this way, even firms that have more long-term workers, they have had this flexibility of at least not being able to pay them for some months. So actually, I think this measure is both for firms and workers.
I heard some people, especially in the restaurant business, complain in the sense that some of the subsidies are kind of a little bit poisoned because with these ERTEs, you're supposed to keep your employees, you keep paying Social Security, but if this is now going to go on for longer, they're going to go bankrupt anyway. And so in a sense, it kind of misleads them into keeping the business alive that they can't afford anymore.
Exactly. So this is one of the problems that we could think about this, how ERTEs are designed now, because on the one hand, they still need to pay the Social Security, as you were saying, and on the other hand, at first, these are subject to maintaining the employees for a number of months after the ERTE finishes. And this is what some firms are saying, that they cannot be sure that they can hold all their employees hired after the shock, because probably the shock is going to be big and they're going to have to fire some of the employees. And I think this is one of the things that at least the new measure that we're going to implement, or the new policy measure should have. They should try to allow the reallocation of resources to be flexible. They should try to support workers by increasing their human skills, so that they can their human capital, so that it is less costly for them to change jobs, and they can therefore adapt better to the new jobs that they might have access to. But also it should be targeted to more flexibility to firms, because otherwise they're going to go bankrupt and they're going to fire everyone. So this is also going to be bad for workers.
Right. Can I just mention, we already have quite a few questions in the chat box, as you can see. Please keep sending them. We'll open up for discussion after we've had our other two participants contribute. Let me move to Libertad. So it seems that the pandemic is confirming, first of all, that there is a gender gap, but it's also importantly a mother with young children gender gap, in the sense that it's very specific. Have we learned new things, especially with the eye on implementing policies for the future, Libertad?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So thanks for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. So following up on the previous speakers, they have talked about the current crisis having unequal effects by earnings level. Beatriz talked about unequal effects by sector. And as Jan said, another aspect in which the current crisis is having unequal effects on different workers is gender. So the current crisis is affecting women's employment more than earlier recessions. And this is for several reasons. So let me give 3 reasons why we should worry about the impact of the current recession on gender equality. The first one is related to sectors. So the same, unequal effect by sector that Beatriz was discussing. So previous recessions, like the 2008 crisis, as you know, affected male-dominated sectors like construction and manufacturing. So this was more of a man's session, while the current recession or the current crisis is affecting the services sector more. And sectors like tourism, hospitality, retail, these are sectors that are female-dominated. So for example, in Spain, about 60% of service workers are women. So if we look at, for example, data from the labor force survey, the second quarter that we have for Spain now, we can see that both job losses and furloughs affected men and women about the same, but if anything, they affected women a bit more. So women's starting point was higher unemployment rates and lower employment rates in Spain as in other countries, and job losses and furloughs are affecting them differentially in the short term. The second reason why we should worry about gender inequality is closer to what Jan was talking about, related to childcare needs. So of course, the spring lockdown as well as current school closings are affecting women disproportionately. And this is for the simple reason that women are usually the main caregiver in the home. So when there are higher care needs, they fall more heavily on women. This is something that we have documented with 2 surveys that we conducted in Spain during April and May, and we will do a follow-up in November. Women are, bearing a heavy burden in terms of childcare, even controlling for work hours. They're facing this double burden now more than before, and this compromises their labor market attachment. In the US, for example, there's already evidence of significant drops in women's labor market participation related to schools not reopening. So this is the second reason. And the third reason why I think we should worry about unequal effects by gender is the increasing prevalence of working from home. So working from home is becoming more common. This will probably remain so for a while. Is this good or bad for women and gender equality? So on the one hand, working from home can be seen as a measure that helps, balancing family and work, which is something that women typically value. Work hours can become more flexible. It saves commuting time. On the other hand, this is kind of a poisoned gift, because women will likely use the opportunity to work from home more than men. And this will tend to reinforce kind of traditional specialization patterns, women at home, men in the office. It will likely reinforce women's role as a main homemaker and caregiver, and it may actually compromise their careers, since we know that workers that take more advantage of family-friendly kind of policies, they end up progressing less in their careers in the labor market. So I do worry about the effects of the current crisis on gender equality, not only in the short term, but also in the longer term, since we know that temporary absences from the labor market can have long-term effects on workers, and in particular women's earnings, and the gender gap in labor market outcomes, as we know from the evidence on the child penalty. So I think, in terms of policy recommendations, we should think about how to make different types of policies, in particular policies that are family friendly, how to design them so that we encourage a more kind of gender equal use of them. I'm thinking about, for example, paid leave to take care of children, or the option to work from home. If we just make them gender neutral, women are going to use them, and this is going to reinforce gender gaps in the labor market. If we can somehow encourage a more gender equal distribution of these types of options to spend more time working at home versus in the market, this will probably have important long-term effects in the labor market.
Libertad, you talked about policy, but one thing that strikes me is that if you look at fiscal policy, monetary policy, the reaction was very fast, very quick. If I look at social policy, addressing, for example, these gender biases, I see much less of a reaction. Maybe it's much harder, maybe it's much more difficult to do something that is impactful in a short period of time. But I only see debate about, the problem, but very little debate about concrete solutions.
Yes, I agree with you. It's a little bit surprising that there hasn't been more action on this front. Yeah, so policies that honestly, I think it's related to the lack of a strong lobby. For example, like working parents don't have a voice in the public debate. Children definitely don't have a voice, or, you know, women workers in general. So, you know, firms have more of a voice in the public debate, and they were able to demand, you know, policies for them to support employment, to avoid firing workers, to stay afloat. While, you know, families, I don't think they have a very open way of communicating or organizing their needs. So I do think that that's a problem.
Right. Okay, we'll come back to some of these issues. I would like to move on to Kiku now, who's basically has been doing work on social distancing. I just want to throw out some kind of obvious things that people have talked about, but there's huge differences between, say, you know, Asia, China, which with a centralized, more authoritarian type of intervention has managed, you know, to contain contagion. It worked like a charm. You look at the Swedish model, you say, you know, very libertarian, no restrictions to start with. People have self-imposed restrictions that seem to work. At least, you know, initially there was quite an uptick in terms of cases and deaths, but it seemed in the long run it worked. And then you look at cases like the UK and the US, where it's been close to chaos. What should we do? Is it a cultural phenomenon, or is it something that is more related to basically policy?
Well, I also would like to start by giving thanks for this invitation. Honestly, I think it's very unclear. There are, as you say, no, in different countries, they are using different policies. What seems to be clear is that in case of, when there is a very serious threat of a widespread pandemic, generalized infection, introducing social distance is the way to go. At least as of now, when we don't have still a good vaccination or a good medical remedy for these things. One concern, continuing with yours, is that countries over time, even countries that seem to do badly in the beginning, now seem to do much better than others, and countries that seem to do well in the beginning, even now they are not particularly doing precisely well. And this is something that I think it reveals that we still understand very little the way this virus is spread and what really helps. In what sense? In the sense that just looking at what happens, say here in Spain, now we are starting like a second wave of confinement, soft confinement if you want. But apparently, if we have to trust what the politicians tell us, is what matters is this social interaction. Perhaps not that much where we work, but how we get to the place we go when we need to go to work. And this is worrisome. This is worrisome because if you start thinking of this, humans, we are basically social animals, and economics is about a social interaction, right? It's about a productive interaction, but it involves exchanges of people. No? So I don't have much to say about that, at least in the short run. A couple of things that I think that are relevant. You know, in spite of introducing the social distance, you know, there is one phenomena that it's on top of the table, which is within families, the distance now is closer than before. And that is affecting, for instance, potentially the number of people that divorce and things like that. And this is, I think this is relevant. Now, at the same time, the people that the distance, these social distances have increased the distance between people that is in the middle range of distances, but have been making closer people that used to be very far away. For instance, now we all have attended seminars in the US from home, and that I think is good. in our case, no? In our case, let me give you another very casual evidence. Last year, before the confinement, the very first week of my teaching for the undergrads, I had a group to be given class on Friday in the afternoon. In my second class, we were, I think, 40 students. As soon as we confined and we started teaching from home, I had more than 80 students connected to the screen. We need to think of these things. We need to think of these things. What is good and what is bad about social distances. And I think that there is a lot of room to do better things. I have still another, perhaps more interesting issue from the economics perspective, which is the following. In the first wave, I think that the world countries essentially faced a short-run trade-off, and the short-run static trade-off was lives versus the economy. Now, in this second wave, it seems that we may have a longer-term trade-off, a dynamic trade-off. It is about lives today with respect to the economy in the future. And I think that we as economists, we should try to, this is something that we always have been pretending and potentially we do well, is intertemporal trade, right? We should be able to spread the costs and the benefits that happen in different moments in time in a better way. I think that this is our fundamental task, and we should put all of effort to understand this better, no? And if you start thinking of this, there are implications for many things. So I will leave it here, but I can be more concrete about a few things, perhaps.
Kiko, I have a Jan. Can I ask Kiko? So I guess I have trouble with this debate, and in the media about lives versus the economy. I mean, as economists, I mean, money is not the economy, right? I mean, health is part of the utility function, and lives lost. This is a huge cost in terms of social welfare, right? So should we be pushing the debate more in this direction of, like it's not health versus the economy. It's more, trying to balance the different costs in a way that social welfare somehow, falls as little as possible. But it's not. It's not. I don't think it's the right way to put the trade-offs. No.
Yeah, I am sure that we all remember our undergrad classes and perhaps even our PhD classes, no? When we got into this place where we had to talk about what's the value of human life. And that was an unresolved question from the empirical part and also from the theoretical part. And that lack of knowledge, that I would say, lack of concreteness about what to do, how to do these things is still present. Let me give you a couple of examples, or an example of what is going on today in terms of our theoretical work, or if you want, quantitative work using equilibrium models. In these equilibrium models about the pandemic, we introduce a mechanism that spreads the disease and potentially creates death. And at the same time, more or less mechanically, the evolution of the pandemic has an impact on GDP. Let's put it in this way. You see, even in the theoretical models that we are still using today, we have these two very different goods and it is very difficult to say how do we value them. I don't know of any single paper that is able to say, let me put this marginal rate of substitution, this rate of transformation. 1 unit of output is equivalent to those many people. We don't have that, and this is something that at this stage, in this situation, we would really need. Let me tell you more about this.
Very difficult to make policy recommendations if we don't have that. If we.
Exactly. I don't want to say that the economy is employment or something like that, but we need to think more of that. One aspect that I think that is relevant, very relevant in these days, is the fact that the pandemic is showing that there are lots of things that were not working properly. So I think that this is a great opportunity to start saying, hey, we can do much better than we used to do it. And no matter where you look at.
Just look at 1 second, because I would like to open the floor also to some of the questions. We'll come back to some of these issues, but we have several questions from students and also from faculty. If the faculty permits me, I would prefer to go first to the students for some of the questions. I have Jose Nicolas Rosas. I'm going to try to see if we can get everyone invited. Okay, I think you should be able to speak. So I hope you are. If you're not, Nicolas, can you try and see if you can connect? And if not, then I will read out your question. I think Nicolas cannot connect. Okay, so he cannot. So what I'll do is, Nicolas, I'll read out your question. So basically he says, I have a question for Luca. Are there any tools besides fiscal policy and fiscal stimulus that could help in the recovery? Is there any role for trade, monetary, or other types of policy, Luca?
Yeah, this is a very good question because it links to what I wanted to say before. The debate between lives versus the economy might be very fictitious. So if you look, for instance, Sweden did not implement a strict lockdown, but it had as much economic loss as Denmark or other countries where the lockdown was more severe. There is some very nice research by Red Chetty who look at the impact of lockdown across different US states, and it doesn't find a big impact. Because, if the pandemic goes unchecked, economic activity will stop anyway. So, linking to Nicolas' question, probably the best policy that we can try to implement in order to help the economy is to solve the pandemic, to try to address it. So that's for sure the biggest challenge that would help the economy. And, conditional on that, as I said, monetary policy helps, but I think it's a bit limited now because interest rates are already very low and it's a bit blunt for this kind of recession, I think. And something else that could help are public investment programs, because one big issue that we're going to face in the near future is a drop in investment. So investment is dropping big time. So this kind of recession is going to spill over into the future by destroying future productive capacity. And I think that there will be a role for governments in making up for this lost investment. And also helping the research, for instance.
I was going to say exactly that. I mean, it's been very evident from the fact that how much research that has jumped on the problem, both in health, but also in economics, in other fields, using techniques and tools that we know from other things and that have been applied to this. So it seems that there's kind of indirectly a lot of policy that's flowing into the problem. We have a question from Lucila Bonilla. I think this is a question on what Libertad talked about. How permanent will these gender inequality shocks be? What are smart policies that could help close this new gap and build back better?
Thank you, Lucila. So yes, this is something that I've been trying to read about and think about. So what we know is that when there are increased care needs, for example, for example, when a family has a child, there's a lot of public policies that kind of provide parents with tools and funds so that they can stay home and cover those care needs. And what we know from the past is that if we offer those options in a gender neutral way, women are going to use them. I'm talking about paid or unpaid parental leave. I'm talking about the possibility to reduce work hours when you have a small child. Whenever countries offer these types of family-friendly arrangements to cover care needs, women take them up. It's not clear that this is completely driven by comparative advantage or preferences. There's also social norm. And it's not clear that women have and men have all the information about the long-term costs that these arrangements are going to have for their careers, because we know that the careers of women never recover after they have children. So now if we offer, for example, paid leave for parents to stay home when their children cannot go to school in person, for instance, women are going to use them. So I think the types of policies that work in this direction, we can learn from the past. If we want, for example, a more equal distribution of childcare needs between the parents, what countries have done is to establish paternity leave, which is reserved exclusively for fathers. It's still, voluntary. It's not compulsory, obviously, but when you reserve, paid leave period for fathers, they take it up, right? So I think now is the time to do something similar. So if we're going to offer policies that, promote parents staying home to take care of their children, let's promote policies that, let's give a bonus for families that split those types of benefits between the partners. Let's give, extra days of paid leave for parents if those are split between men and women. So these types of policies that give kind of a push in the direction of splitting care needs more evenly between parents. I think that's kind of the way to go if we've learned anything from family policy in the past.
Thank you, Libertad. We have a question from Stefano Lazzeri for Francesc. What do you think of the lockdown that is happening right now, starting tomorrow at midnight? How could they be doing better in your opinion, Francesc?
Thank you for the question.
There you have it. That's for you.
I'm going to tell you the secret. sorry. What worries me about the lockdown that we are about to start is the following: is what will happen in 15 days that will allow to reopen the economy, to reopen social contact. What's the reason behind this? What are we going to solve? I mean, I understand that potentially we will decrease the number of infected people, and that will release a little bit of the tension, the pressure in the public health system. But if this is the goal, then we better think of other solutions or extending the solutions over time for longer. To me, one question that perhaps the other panelists, everyone has been thinking about is this a short-term shock? Is this a transitory shock, or this is a longer-term shock, and therefore we better think of something else? I mean, as of now, the goal seems to be go back to where we were before March, April. But perhaps we have to start thinking of, hey, there is, you see, the technology has changed. All the technologies that we used to use are now different. There is an extra cost. We have to incorporate this thing, and we have to start taking into account this extra cost, a permanent cost. Let me also throw something else. There is this thing that we use, the clock and the calendar. We have hours, time, and calendar to coordinate. And we are used to coordinate in a particular way. Vacations, Christmas, I don't know, work, sleep, and all these things. So, something that we could start doing to increase distance at zero cost potentially is to change the calendar, to change the clock. Why don't we start thinking about things like that? I mean, of course, one has to think properly and well, But we need this kind of, we need to start thinking in a different way,
Thank you, Francesc. We have a question from Ozanuchuk, who says the following: the WHO physician claims that countries for economic reasons shouldn't use national lockdowns. Local ones they endorse. The IMF says lockdowns have economic benefits. Who should you believe about economics, doctors or economists? Who wants to take this one?
Can I take a stab? I think we should believe.
Look, I have a go.
We should believe empirical evidence. So, if you look at the data, we already have very good data on the behavior of similar economies under and without lockdown. And it doesn't seem to be a very big economic impact so far. So, the IMF got it right this time.
But are you referring to the fact that, for example, in the comparison between Sweden and Norway and Denmark, for example, between Sweden and Norway and Denmark, that Sweden didn't have a lockdown, but the economic activity dropped for voluntary reasons. I mean, people understood that there was a personal danger. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's the idea. That I don't think it's the lockdown per se that is stopping economic activity. It's really the pandemic. And if you don't stop the pandemic through a lockdown, it's going to have an impact on economic activity nonetheless, because people are going to be scared and they're not going to go to work or to consume.
What I find striking is that, the people who have the highest risk, obviously, I mean, it's a fully rational react most. I see much fewer older people in the street. They don't go out. They have a good reason to. Whereas the young people, kids go out, they don't care. Because if they get it, well, I mean, it's going to be a bit painful, but their life is not in danger, at least to the extent that the older people have this. Let me move on to another question. Let me see here who I have. Nadine Schüttler, do you think all the governmental intervention, indirect nationalization of companies, more rules, etc., will harm market activity in the long term? I think this is one for Beatriz, I think.
So hi, thank you for the question. Well, it depends probably on the governmental intervention. Yeah, so actually some way of actually supporting firms actually is through participating somehow in their capital, or at least one of the problems of firms, well, in Spain and in Europe as well, is that they rely too much on debt. So they are very debt intensive. So one of the possibilities could be to make a more efficient capital market, so that firms can go and raise equity actually from the equity markets. And in this way, all the shareholders are sharing the risks of the firm. So it is not as debt. So actually, I think having the government going towards that direction would help in the end. Again, so in that, yeah, nationalization of companies, well, it depends on which ones and how much. And again, so the rules, as I was saying, for instance, before the ERTES, it's true that they might fire back in the end because of this inflexibility they're creating in firms. And but still, I think, as Luca was saying before, fiscal policy needs to take action now, because I think it's the only way that we might get out of this.
There's Francesc.
I have a question related to this. Should we have an insurance benefits program for firms that happen to fall into low activity or inactivity? Should we have in the same way that we have an unemployment benefit program for unemployed workers, should we have something similar for firms? Simply like that.
But you're
it's
talking.
It's a question. Eh?
You're talking about autonomous, or firms that like people that just own a firm, or just like to ACS or everyone. I'm not sure. So probably I think at least for autonomous and very small firms, these entrepreneurs are small, there might be the need of something like that, at least, or some. So the problem now with entrepreneurs is that, well, it is very risky to start a firm, and it is terribly risky to go bankrupt, because if you go bankrupt, you have like taking a loan, you have your house is the collateral, so you will lose everything. Once you go bankrupt with the firm you created, that's it. So then you just wait and die pretty much. And this is something that, for example, in the US doesn't happen. So it is bankruptcies are much more efficient. There is not this dead weight loss of going bankrupt, or just having a firm that exits, and that is not a problem. So I think there should be improvement towards that direction. I'm not sure about all firms. So once we start talking about huge firms that have a lot of shareholders, it depends, but it might be something to consider. Actually, I hadn't thought about it.
There's one related question specifically. I mean, we have touched on the issue already about what's going to happen to the debt with all this fiscal stimulus, but it's specifically about the ERTES. And so the question is, which impact will the ERTES have on the Spanish public debt? Will they be worthy considering the cost they imply? So I guess the question is, the ERTE just by itself, is that a threat for the debt? Maybe Luca?
I think it might be, because you know, I think the risk of a fiscal crisis is not big in most advanced economies. I think it is a possibility in Spain, as I said before, because Spain is part of the euro. So it's very easy for Spanish investors to move money out of Spanish government bonds and toward German government bonds. So at the first sign of, you know, fiscal crisis in Spain, there might be capital flight, and this might generate a fiscal crisis. That said, you know, what's the alternative? You know, ERTE is one way to keep the economy alive, and I think we should try. Giving up this program to avoid the risk of a future financial crisis, it's giving up something that we need for some uncertain outcome in the future. What I think is that we need to push at the European level for a system of fiscal transfer that try to limit the asymmetry in the shock, and the European Recovery Fund is a very good step in this direction.
Right.
But Luca, now that we know that this is going to be, you know, longer than we thought at the beginning, isn't it very costly to kind of keep all these potentially zombie firms alive? Like I think Beatriz was referring to that earlier. Shouldn't we think of a way to, you know, some firms should probably, you know, dine out for everyone, and people should start creating new firms that live in the new reality and who hire new workers. And this might be kind of preventing this from happening in a way, no?
Yeah. And if I can say one thing, so here there's been a different approach in the US and in Europe. In the US, you know, US relied mostly on unemployment benefits, on an extension unemployment benefits. What's the idea? Let's firm go bust and we support the worker who's job. And that's better if you think there is some structural change in the economy and you need reallocation of workers across sectors. Here, the idea was, let's try to keep the value of the firm alive, and let's keep workers attached to the firm. So I think that both approaches have benefits and costs. If there's going to be a lot of structural change, it's better to let.
That's the problem. At the beginning, we didn't know, right, how structural it would be. With perhaps, perhaps in Europe we.
You know, probably it would be good to let some firms in some sector go bust and to preserve some others, but it's hard to assess.
If I may add, so the problem, so there needs to be support to keep jobs. The problem maybe is the design of the ERTEs that we have in Spain, as Luca was saying. So maybe now, so as Libertad was saying, at first we didn't know, so this is what we came up with to just try to avoid mass layoffs. But now we're starting to learn more about the shock. So these measures should adapt. And we cannot let people just get fired and that's it. And actually the European Commission is setting all these programs to actually help all these member states, like the SURE, for instance, for these ERTEs and these to support these unemployed. So I think it is not that we should just stop the ERTEs, but maybe we should rethink about them and think how to redesign them so that they are more efficient, and we are not just increasing misallocation by just giving resources to these firms that in the end should just exit.
I'm going to take the liberty to go over time a little bit with one more question, and then we'll wrap up. That also means that a lot of questions that have been asked will not be answered. I'm really sorry about that, but that's just, I think, a good sign. It's the fact that it's an interesting debate. There's a last question that's now on this Q&A that we get here for Luca. And the question has to do with, you know, it's kind of a way to close this opening of the year, because, you know, okay, we can talk about the problem, but tomorrow we're doing our problem sets again. And so the question is, do we have to throw out all proven macro workhorse models out of the window, or is there a smart way to model 7 stops to the economy? That's kind of a more technical question, thinking about what are we doing here being in the program. Luca.
But what can I say is that I was impressed by how fast research in macroeconomics reacted to the shock, by how fast, you know, the field developed models to try to think about the specificity of the current recession. And of course, this was possible because we were building on an existing stock of knowledge, on some models that needed to be modified, but that were useful as a base. So I will not throw away macro, what we learned about macro before COVID-19. Actually, I think it was a very good starting point for this explosion in research about trying to understand what's going on now.
And I think also to me, kind of following some of these seminars, that it's proven how useful some of the techniques that we know, that we understand very well, and then maybe epidemiologists didn't use in the same way that we do, you know, like modeling behavior in these contagion models, not just talking about the pure economics, but just the kind of the tools that we have seem to be fairly kind of workhorse in the sense that they can be applied to very different things. So I think I agree with Luca there. If you permit me, I would just like to start first by thanking the panelists for the discussion, for the debate. I would also like to thank everyone participating in the questions and in being here for this roundtable. It's strange, you know, we can't have a Copa de Cava now, but let's have one after this, just all by ourselves and with our families. I wish everyone a great year. It's going to be different, but it's going to be, you know, like we came out with this discussion, we learn new things. Probably we'll say, you know, there's certain things we never want again, so we'll have to put up with them for the time being. But there will be other things that are going to be better. You know, maybe we have different ways of interacting, and we learn new things. So have a good academic year for everyone, and I would like to leave it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, for doing such a good job, and for all the panelists. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.